About a week ago, I showed off my Poet's Pin build using Barrage and its new mechanic, and I've taken it through the end game. I fought Cirrus. We'll get into that later, how that goes. But I thought I'd go ahead and do a build guide on this because I think while it's not the best mapper, not the best bosser, it's a very good all-around character and a lot of fun to play. So I've got a tier 16 here. I'm just going to shut up and run it for you. Alright, that was the map, and a T16 Metamorph. Now, this isn't the craziest T16 map there is, but it's average enough. So here, let's get started with this in the tree. So first of all, we're going to be mainly in the shadow area. That's where we start as Assassin. And we're going to branch off into the Witch for a couple lightning nodes, some spell crit. And initially I had gone into the Templar to grab Overcharge, but I realized that I was really only over there for that one node. So I decided to opt instead to go down into the Ranger area, grab Phase Acrobatics, and pick up the notables here. And I think this has been the play, because before the build was very squishy, it had no layers of defense, so I had to find a lot of ways to make the build tankier. So this is what we're looking at. I'll have a POB in the description after this. But mainly we're going after frenzies and power charges. That is the basis of this build and how we are going to be getting a lot of damage. So let's talk about some gear. First of all, let's start with the Poet's Pin, the star of this build. We have 4 of them because we will be doing a weapon swap for the boss. And in the first pin, you'll have Arc and Lightning Warp, and the second, you'll have Arc and Ball Lightning. We'll get into the gems a little bit later. So on the helm, we have a self-crafted. This is something that I worked on for a little bit. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. This was done using Delph fossils, both pristine and metallic, just 2, and spamming it on a helmet that had arc damage on it. And I was lucky enough to get one with the life, the minus 9% lightning res, and a couple other good things. I slammed a Hunter's Orb on it to get that cold damage to spells. A little unlucky, I was hoping for lightning, but it'll do just fine. Onto the amulet. We are allocating Overcharge again. This was the main reason I was over in Templar, so this kind of freed up a lot of space on the tree to go to the right instead. So I think this is a good play. There are a lot of other options. If you want to ditch that power charge, I feel like Constitution would be a tanky option. There's some other things that might be interesting, like Druidic Rite. There's a lot of options, but I've gone with Overcharge for this build. And so this amulet, the Choir of the Storm, this is a very large part of the build. There's a general theme with the gear is that we're trying to squeeze out as much damage as possible, because the reality of it is we are on 2/3 links and we are playing a nerfed build. The Poet's Pin, while we do have this new barrage mechanic that is making us attack way faster, it is not enough to make up for the fact that we are playing a nerfed build ultimately. So it's not going to blow anyone's mind with the DPS against bosses, but it gets the job done respectively. So with that, we get this level 20 lightning bolt on critical strike. This is often overlooked, I think, because this is a very serious source of damage. The lightning bolt actually does quite a bit, and I think a lot of people overlook this amulet nowadays because it's kind of fallen into the woodwork a little bit. It's a very good amulet, and we also get critical strike chance is increased by lightning res, which on my build I've got 98%, and this is uncapped, by the way. That's what it gives you, and that's awesome. That's just 98% more crit for this build, which is very good. I may be wrong on that. It may just be the uncapped, the 75, but either way, a very nice addition to the build. Next on, we have the Feral's Fur. So when I showed off the build, I was using Impulsa. It was a very good option. We had some nice explosions from the pack for clear, but it left a lot to be desired for bossing because my frenzies would fall off after I was done fighting the packs and I was only left with the boss. So it was very difficult to have a good bossing setup, and it often felt that bosses were pretty hard with just the Impulsa. So I opted for a Feral's Fur so that we can have 100% uptime on frenzies and power. They never drop off and they never even make a sound in the hideout. If you don't want to drop 7.5 exalts for a Feral's Fur, that's fine. You can run the Impulsa, but you will run into some issues with how my build works because it's very reliant on the frenzy charges. There's some ways to get around this. You can craft on a Redeemer pair of gloves. You can get up to 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge on kill, which is very good for sustaining frenzies. It's not the best. I mean, I would much rather take the Feral's Fur for the constant and the reassurance that you always have them, but it is an expensive option. So this is something you can run, and of course these are crafted with Essence of Insanities on the Redeemer base. I had to go through about 30 to get this pair. I later found this pair after about 10 or 15 more. This is what I'm running with now since I'm using the Ferals. Big fan of this with the extra lightning damage to do a critical strike. If you don't want to do that, you can do Blood Rage. I'm not a big fan of Blood Rage because I don't like bleeding out in between packs, but your millage may vary, so you can try out a lot of these things. So let's see, here on the boots, this is another very interesting part of the build. Tailwind is not only a great movement ability, or I should say a movement it's not useful for just movement. We can also get a lot of damage out of this since this is more action speed. So it's going to be making our attacks go off faster too once we've crit. So I would call this a mandatory part of the build if you want to get into the higher tiers, but it's, maybe I shouldn't say mandatory, probably less than mandatory, but very nice to have. This was, again, I crafted this in about 200 Chaos Orbs. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Probably just buy it from somebody else. Don't waste your money. And onto the belt. Belt is average. We just have strength, some reses and life, very standard. The Barracks Grip. This is something that I definitely wouldn't change out because we have very limited sources of damage leech without otherwise having a Watcher's Eye or something. So this is going to be our main source of leech, along with life gain on hit. We'll get to that in a bit. But and in addition, it gives you a good amount of damage to spells, a little bit of life, not much, but it gets the job done. The other ring, for the aspect of cat, I was lucky enough to find this ring that had an open suffix so that I could craft the aspect of the cat, which is needed to run the Feral's Fur, because you do not just get it inherently, you have to have it on an ability, or on a piece of gear rather. And this is just pretty standard. This doesn't need to be like this. You could just have an aspect of the cat and make up for res somewhere else. It's very possible. All right, so I think that covers the gear. Maybe there's one other thing. Yeah, let's talk about some of these gems and flask options. So I'm using Wise Oak to penetrate a little bit more. Could very well just use an Series Promise in place. That would be fine, and it would give you a little bit extra leech. I don't really like it because the flask doesn't last that long, and I've just noticed better results with the Wise Oak overall. But again, you may have different results. As far as the silver flask here goes, you could very easily swap in a Cinder Swallow Urn if you know that you're not going to be running a curse map, because our options for getting rid of ailments is kind of limited here. So I've opted mainly just to run this because while I like the Cinder Swallow, having 40 charges is kind of annoying, and this is just a better setup for me overall, not having to swap out for a map that has curses. Now the Watcher's Eye. There's a few options for Watcher's Eye. I actually was not using one in this build. I kind of like this Precision mod. It's about 1 Exalt. And this is what I slot in whenever I'm fighting bosses, because it is very hard to get your flask back once you're in a deep fight. That can be the difference of surviving and dying, is getting your flask back against a single boss. And I've noticed that you get a lot back. I don't know how Ball Lightning interacts with this, but it hits several times, so I feel as though you get a lot of flash charges just from this in this build, based on how fast we attack, how often we're critting as Assassin. So that's very good. Alright, let's get into Ascendancy options. So we are Assassin. This is, I wouldn't say mandatory. I feel as though Inquisitor could work. But then again, the tree would be very different and not at all like this. I'm kind of liking this version. First off, we go to Unstable Infusion to get more power charges and ability to gain them by critting. And then we're going to go down to Deadly Infusion just for more damage, movement speed, all that good stuff. And then Elusive, or Mistwalker rather, just to get Elusive. We get the additional attack speed, which again is good for our Poet's Pin. Get reduced damage, Elusive effect, it's all good stuff. Here's where I think there's an option. You can either make a case for Ambush and Assassinate or Opportunistic. I've gone ahead and taken Opportunistic because I don't need the Culling Strikes have, or Bits have Culling Strike, because I have it built into my 4-link. So I've opted instead just to go with Opportunistic for some extra movement speed and some more damage against rares. And I think this is fine for this setup. I don't really feel the need to take a little bit more damage from this. Alright, so as far as gear, we've talked about that. Let's look at the gems. So here we have Arc, and I highly recommend you get a 2120 gem if you can. Currently they're about 70C, and I think that this is the biggest investment, or the biggest you can get out of your build for the investment. 70C is going to take you pretty far. Like this 2120, you'll never need another gem. See, the reality of being on a 3-link is that every one of our gems matters a lot more because we can't make it up with 3 other supports. So the gems we do have need to be very good, and that's one of them. So, and then we're going to couple that with Controlled Destruction for just more damage. We've got plenty of crits, so that's fine to lose a little bit, and Lightning Pin. Through this build, we'll be stacking about 84% against just normal mapping enemies, and it'll go well over 100 if we apply our conductivity. So that might be necessary, but it's just an extra layer of offense. So that's the left pin, and then the right pin we got Lightning Warp, Swift Affliction, and List Duration. This is a very common setup just for moving quickly, while we alternate with Arc just to zip through the map. In the other pins, it's Arc in the same setup with a Ball Lightning setup with slower projectiles and lightning penetration. And I feel as though most of the damage for the bossing comes from Ball Lightning. I'm not a POB expert or anything, but I feel as though most of it comes from the Ball Lightning. So you'll definitely want to get a 2120 if you can. They're very expensive, so I haven't opted to get one yet. That would be an awesome upgrade for the build. So next in the chest, we have a really funky setup, and I'm open to change on this, but I found that this has been very good for everything I've thrown at it. So we start with the Herald of Ice in a 5-link with Conductivity, Curse on Hit, and Innervate. So these support gems are also touched by Wave of Conviction, which is using Curse on Hit and Conductivity, because this will be the only way we can apply the curse against the boss, because obviously we're not going to be able to shatter enemies right next to it easily. So for mapping, you'll have the Herald of Ice proccing Conductivity and Innervate, giving you more damage, and Wave of Conviction for whenever you get to the boss and you want to put that extra debuff. And together this is 25 and 45, so we have 70% extra lightning penetration we're getting just from clicking one button of Wave of Conviction, which lasts a pretty good amount of time. So I'm a big fan of the setup, and then we just have a Precision sitting lonely in a non-socketed area or non-linked area. For the helm, let's look at this. We've got a Vol Haste. I don't use the Haste aura. This is just for using Haste, the Vol version rather. And I pop this for the Metamorph usually. In the map we just did, I popped it for the boss, but I really should have saved it for the Metamorph because they're much more deadly. We have a pretty rudimentary cast when damage taken support setup. We have Immortal Call and Withering Step. I'm not sold on using Withering Step here, but my thought was if I hadn't attacked recently, I was in a scary boss fight where I'm running around dodging things, I will get hit, and I will cast this, which will give me Elusive, which on the Assassin, if you have Elusive, you take no extra damage from critical strikes. So this is a layer of defense instead of a movement ability. This is just going to be cast whenever we're hit, and it's to guarantee we have Elusive up, so that way if we get hit again, we're not going to take additional damage from crits. So that's a pretty nice part of this. Let's look down in the boots. We've got a Flame Dash setup with faster casting and Arcane Surge. I have Arcane Surge specifically at level 7, because in a 3-link here, that's as far as you can take it without making it such a high mana cost requirement that you have to Flame Dash twice. So at level 7, you Flame Dash once, you have Arcane Surge every single time. And it's good for 4 seconds. And then just got a Wrath sitting there solo. In the gloves, this is the real important part of this. We're using Barrage, not Frenzy like people typically do with Poet's Pen builds. If you haven't seen my other video, I urge you to watch it, and I go over in detail why this is better, because it's that third line for fires projectiles sequentially, and that's a big part of why we're getting these ridiculous procs. And just to prove this, because a lot of people were skeptical, they said, hey, why don't you use Frenzy? I'm sure Frenzy with a bunch of Frenzy charges would be faster. Well, this is just not true. If I could find it here, it's Frenzy. So yes, this is the amount we're getting. Barrage. Let's see what we do. Frenzy. I don't know if you can see the distance there, but it's quite a bit different. Not nearly as fun either. So this is the attacking support, or attacking gem. You don't need to level it to 2. I just accidentally leveled it up and didn't mess around with it. Next is faster attacks, just to attack faster to proc more Poet's Pen abilities. And I'm using Cooling Strike both for the 11 or 10% increased attack speed and to cool enemies at 10%. Very nice. We're squeezing out as much damage as we can. And then this is the controversial option that I think. I've gone back and forth on this. The last slot is something I've stayed up in bed many nights thinking about what's the best thing. And I've eventually landed on life gain on hit. And I think this is the best option. For a while I was running blind, and this is really nice, but we already have so many ways of dodging that it seems as though we're either going to get one hit on this build, or we're either going to get one hit, or we're going to just get hit once and then get pounded down again. So life gain on hit is a little extra layer of security because we have so many ways of dodging. I think that this is just going to beat out blind in most cases. I was also running Mana Leech for a while. This is not something I really think is needed, because after a while you can take this notable Mind Drinker, which is giving you attack damage, leeches mana, and mana on kill. This is plenty enough. If you are pumping your barrage into a boss, you should not run out of mana, hopefully, if your pen setup is doing enough damage. Okay, so let's go on to, I think that's all the gems that are socketed in. Let's talk about the Pantheon. Oh, wait, let's actually, before we do that, let's talk about Volley Fire. So this is a really funny option. Would be very good for mapping. If you're really scared, really want to do the blind thing, this is kind of interesting. You can pretty much hit the whole map in front of you with this. Maybe get life gain on hitback or blind things in front of you before you ever get close to them. That's a very valid option. I've decided that I tried it out for a while. I didn't really like it, but it's something you can do there. And yeah, I think that about sums that up. So let's talk about the Pantheon a little bit before we close up here. The Brine King is my choice, although I think a good case could be made for Lunaris or Solaris. But really, the thing that I've noticed killed this build the most is getting stunned. And stun is the death of this build. We want to stop that from happening as much as possible, so repeat stuns aren't allowed within 2 seconds, can't be frozen again, and all this stuff is just really good for making sure we don't get locked down too hard. For the miner, I've decided to take Shikari with the upgraded immune to poison. This league is a lot of chaos damage, and currently I've got none. So the hits are very big, and just any chaos mitigation is really welcome in this build, and I'm really a big fan of this. So that's the Pantheon. I'm going to do some final thoughts here. I had a Cirrus fight. I've only been able to get him once, and I took the first portal, and I had never really looked at any of the fight before, or anybody doing the fight before, so I kind of went in mostly blind. I took him to about 50% HP in the first portal, and I didn't know the mechanics, and I got killed. It was fine. I came back in, and he decided to sit in clouds for a while. So the fight didn't go well after that. I mostly just died to clouds trying to kite him around. I do think this build can do Cyrus, and I think it could probably even do it deathless if you have good mechanics, although I can't attest to that, even though I think that my attempt went pretty well up until it hit south. Other than that, T16s, they usually get a little bit harder than the one I showed. There are some really beefy metamorphs out there that are going to chunk you, and it's just the reality of playing a 4500 HP build. I tried to get as much as I could, but it's the reality you're going to get smacked down once in a while. But it's very good and very agile with the flame dashing playstyle. You shoot a while, you flame dash, it's very active, very fun to play against the bosses. So yeah, we're playing this nerfed build, and the barrage interaction really doesn't bring us up to the point of me wanting to recommend this to everybody, because again, a lot of this gear is high investment. Even though I crafted most of this for fairly cheap, I don't expect most people to be able to do that. So I couldn't recommend this to everyone, but if you really enjoy the Poet's Pen playstyle and like zipping around with Lightning Warp, then I definitely would give this a try. I'm sure other people have some really good ideas on how to make this good as well, and there's probably a lot of things I've looked over. It could be really good to implement into this build. It's a lot of fun. I hope you guys have fun with it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thanks for watching.